The Montana sky stretched endlessly above Aiden Cole as he stood at the edge of what used to be a town. Crimson River had been reduced to little more than a few abandoned buildings and overgrown roads since the war ended 34 years ago. The October wind carried the scent of pine and rust, biting through his worn jacket as he adjusted the strap of his military-issue backpack, the same one he'd carried in 1951. At 62, Aiden's body bore the map of war. A limp from shrapnel that never quite healed right, hands that trembled when the temperature dropped, and a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone. But it was his mind that carried the heaviest burden. The bridge. Always the bridge. He walked down Main Street, his boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The general store where he'd bought cigarettes before shipping out was now a hollow shell, its windows dark and vacant. The diner where he'd kissed Harper Lane goodbye had collapsed entirely, leaving only a foundation and memories he wished he could forget. Shouldn't have come back, he muttered to himself, his breath visible in the cold air. But he had to. The nightmares had grown worse over the past year. Vivid, suffocating dreams where he heard the screams, saw the iron twisting like paper, felt the river swallow men whole. His therapist at the VA hospital in Billings had suggested confronting the source of his trauma. Aiden figured she meant talking about it. He decided to see it instead. The path to the river was overgrown with wild grass and thorny bushes that caught on his pants. He remembered this trail being wide enough for military trucks. Now nature had reclaimed what man had abandoned. As he pushed through the vegetation, fragments of the past flickered through his mind like an old film reel. April 1951. The bridge had been critical, a supply route that connected Allied forces to the forward operating bases near the river. Lose the bridge. Lose the war in this sector. That's what Colonel Mason Graves had told them during the briefing. Aiden had been a sergeant then, responsible for a squad of 12 men, most of them barely old enough to shave. The sound of rushing water pulled him back to the present. Through the trees, he caught his first glimpse of the Crimson River. It was wider than he remembered, swollen from recent rains, its waters dark and churning. And there, twisted and broken like the spine of some great beast, lay the remnants of the iron bridge. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. Even after 3 decades, the sight hit him like a physical blow. The bridge's central span had collapsed into the river, its massive iron beams bent and rusted, creating a skeletal monument to failure. The support towers on either bank still stood, defiant but purposeless, connected to nothing. He approached slowly, his heart pounding. The western bank where he now stood was muddy and treacherous. He could see where the original military fortifications had been, concrete bunkers now crumbling and covered in moss, foxholes filled with rainwater and debris. 247 men, Aiden whispered, staring at the wreckage. 247. He'd known the exact number for 34 years. It was burned into his memory like a brand. When the bridge fell, it took not just the men crossing it, but also 2 supply trucks, a medical transport, and any hope of holding the Eastern Front. The enemy had used specialized artillery, something his superiors had insisted was impossible, didn't exist, couldn't reach the bridge from their positions. They'd been wrong. Aiden climbed down the embankment, using exposed roots and rocks for handholds. His bad leg protested, but he ignored it. Up close, the bridge was even more devastating. The iron beams were pockmarked with holes from the artillery barrage. He ran his hand along one beam, feeling the rough texture of rust and decay. Something caught his eye. A piece of fabric snagged on a twisted bolt. He pulled it free carefully. It was rotted and faded, but he could still make out the pattern. Military camouflage, the kind they'd worn. Aiden closed his eyes, clutching the fabric. "Sergeant Cole?" The voice startled him so badly he nearly lost his footing. He spun around, his hand instinctively going to his hip where a sidearm would have been decades ago. Standing on the bank above him was a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore hiking boots, jeans, and a flannel jacket. A camera hung around her neck. "Who's asking?" Aiden called back, his voice rougher than he intended. "Dana Steele. I'm a historian with the Montana War Memorial Foundation." She climbed down to his level with practiced ease. "I've been documenting this site for the past 6 months. When I saw you walking down here, I thought, well, you had the look of someone who'd been here before." Aiden studied her carefully. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and held no judgment, only curiosity and something that might have been respect. "I was here when it fell," he said simply. Dana's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and solemn recognition. "Then you're one of the survivors." "There were only 18. 17 now. Connor Blake died last spring. Heart attack." "I'm sorry." She moved closer, her boots squelching in the mud. "Mr. Cole, if you don't mind my asking,
Most veterans I've interviewed
why come back
avoid
now?
this place like it's cursed."
Aiden looked back at the twisted metal. "Because I need to know why it fell. The official report said it was structural failure combined with enemy fire. But that's not the whole truth, is it?" Dana's face betrayed nothing, but Aiden saw her hand tighten around her camera strap. "What makes you think there's more to the story?" "Because I was there, Mrs. Steele. I saw things, heard things, and when I tried to report them, I was told to keep my mouth shut for the good of the war effort." He turned to face her fully. "You're a historian. You've done research. Tell me I'm crazy. Tell me the official story is true." Dana was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the rushing river and the wind through the broken bridge. Finally, she spoke, her voice careful and measured. "The official record has inconsistencies. Documents that were classified for decades. Witness testimonies that contradict each other. And there's evidence of a cover-up. Small things, but they're there if you know where to look." Aiden felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd carried for so long it had become part of him. "So I'm not crazy." "No, Sergeant Cole, you're not crazy." Dana paused, seeming to make a decision. "I have a research station set up about a mile from here, Old Ranger Cabin. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to hear your story, the real one." Dana's research station was exactly what she'd described, a weathered ranger cabin that had seen better decades. Inside, it was surprisingly organized, folding tables covered with documents, photographs, and maps. A laptop running on a portable generator, filing boxes stacked neatly against one wall. The walls themselves were covered with a massive timeline, pieces of paper connected by colored string like something from a detective movie. Aiden stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "You've been busy." "Coffee?" Dana was already pouring from a thermos. "It's instant, but it's hot." "Black is fine." He accepted the cup and moved closer to examine her timeline. April 1951 was marked with a red circle, dozens of notes radiating outward. He recognized names: Colonel Mason Graves, Captain Logan Reed, Lieutenant Ethan Ward. And there, in his own handwriting from 34 years ago, photocopies of his after-action reports. "Where did you get these?" he asked, pointing to his reports. "Freedom of Information Act request. Took 2 years and 3 lawyers, but the government finally released most of the Korean War documents. Yours were among them." Dana pulled out a chair for him. "Please sit. Your leg must be killing you after that climb." He wasn't sure he liked being so transparent, but he sat anyway. The chair creaked under his weight. Dana sat across from him, pulling out a notepad and a small recording device. "Do you mind if I record this?" Aiden stared at the device. For 34 years, he'd kept silent. The military had made that very clear. What happened at Crimson River was classified, a matter of national security, not to be discussed outside official channels. But the war was long over, and the men who'd ordered his silence were probably dead. "Go ahead," he said. Dana pressed record, stated the date, time, and location. then looked at him expectantly. Start wherever you're comfortable. Aiden took a sip of the bitter coffee, organizing his thoughts. We arrived at Crimson River in March 1951. The bridge had been completed 2 months earlier, a major engineering achievement, they told us. Solid iron construction, designed to handle heavy military traffic. It was our lifeline to the Eastern Territories. Your squad was assigned to bridge security, protection detail, Eastern approach, 12 men under my command. He paused, remembering their faces. Tyler Shaw was my corporal. Good kid from Tennessee, always had a joke ready. Hunter Briggs was our sharpshooter, could hit a target at 1,000 yards. Jordan Cross handled communications. The rest were infantry. Young, scared, but trying not to show it. Dana scribbled notes. The official report says enemy artillery struck the bridge on April 14th at approximately 14:30 hours. Is that accurate? The time is right. But it wasn't just artillery. Aiden set down his coffee cup. 2 days before the bridge fell, we started noticing things, small things. Stress fractures in some of the iron beams. Nothing major, but Hunter mentioned it to me, said he'd seen similar patterns in a factory collapse back home. Did you report it? To Captain Logan Reed, yes. He inspected the bridge personally, told me the fractures were within acceptable parameters, nothing to worry about. Aiden's jaw tightened. The next day there were more fractures. And that's when I saw the first sign that something was deliberately wrong. Dana leaned forward. What did you see? There were inspection marks on some of the structural bolts. Fresh marks, like someone had been loosening them. I reported that too, directly to Colonel Graves this time. He ordered a full investigation. Aiden rubbed his face, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming him. But before they could complete it, the artillery barrage started. Walk me through what happened. Aiden closed his eyes and suddenly he was there again. The deafening roar of explosions, the screams, the terrible grinding sound of metal tearing itself apart. We were on the eastern side when the first shells hit. The bridge was full, 2 trucks crossing, maybe 30 men on foot. The shells weren't random. They hit specific points, structural weak points, like someone had given them a blueprint. His voice cracked. The central span went first, just folded. I saw men fall into the river. Tyler Shaw was on that bridge. I heard him screaming my name. Dana's pen had stopped moving. I'm sorry. The worst part was what came after. The enemy pushed through, and we had no way to retreat. 17 of us held that eastern bank for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived through the northern route. 6 hours of hell, knowing that if the bridge hadn't fallen, none of it would have happened. Your report mentions that you found evidence of sabotage. Can you elaborate? Aiden opened his eyes. After the battle, before they evacuated us, I went back to the wreckage. Found several structural bolts that had been deliberately weakened. Not by artillery. They'd been filed down, acid-treated. Professional work. I gave them to Colonel Graves. Told him we had a saboteur. What did he say? He thanked me for my service and told me the bolts would be analyzed. Then, 3 days later, I was called into a meeting with him and 2 men in civilian clothes. They told me that for reasons of national security and morale, the bridge collapse would be attributed to a combination of structural failure and enemy action. Any talk of sabotage was to cease immediately. They made it very clear that my career, and possibly my freedom, depended on my cooperation. Dana sat back, processing this. Did they threaten you directly? They didn't have to. I'd seen what happened to soldiers who asked too many questions. Aiden picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold. So I kept quiet. For 34 years I kept quiet. Went home, tried to build a life, failed at marriage twice, spent more nights drunk than sober. Because I knew men died not just from enemy action, but because someone on our side wanted that bridge to fall. Do you have any idea who? I've had 3 decades to think about it. At first I thought it was an enemy infiltrator. But the more I replayed it in my mind, the more I realized it had to be someone with access, knowledge, and authority. Someone who could move around the bridge without suspicion. Dana stood and walked to her timeline, pointing to a section marked Personnel, Bridge Engineering Corps. I've been investigating this angle. There were 15 engineers assigned to the bridge construction and maintenance. Most of them died when it collapsed. But 3 survived. Captain Logan Reed, who you mentioned, a structural engineer named Ryan Pierce, and a civilian contractor named Ethan Ward. Aiden's head snapped up. Ethan Ward was military, lieutenant in the engineering corps. According to the official record, he was a civilian contractor, brought in for his expertise in iron construction. Dana pulled out a file. But you're right to be confused. His military service record was sealed and later partially expunged. It took me 8 months to track down his real identity. She handed Aiden a photograph, a military ID photo of a young man in uniform. It was unmistakably Ethan Ward, but the uniform was wrong, the rank was wrong, and beneath his name was a notation that made Aiden's blood run cold. Military Intelligence Division. He was a spy, Aiden breathed. More accurately, he was counterintelligence. His job was to identify and neutralize enemy infiltrators and security threats. Dana pulled out more documents. And here's where it gets interesting. 3 weeks before the bridge collapsed, Ward filed a classified report claiming he'd identified a potential security breach in the bridge construction materials. He recommended immediate inspection and possible reconstruction. What happened to his report? It was received and filed by Colonel Mason Graves. No action was taken. The implications hit Aiden like a physical blow. Graves knew. He knew the bridge was compromised and he did nothing. It's more complicated than that. Dana showed him another document. Graves did take action. He ordered a quiet investigation, but he kept it compartmentalized. Only 3 people knew about it. Ward was conducting the investigation when the bridge fell. According to his final report, filed 2 days before the collapse, he'd narrowed the saboteur down to 2 suspects. Who? He never specified. The report was filed, and the next day, the bridge collapsed. Ward survived, gave testimony in a closed hearing, then disappeared from all public records in 1952. Aiden stood, his bad leg protesting, and limped to the window. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful and indifferent. So someone killed 247 men to cover their tracks, and the military covered it up to avoid scandal. That's my working theory. But I need proof, and I need testimony from someone who was there. Someone credible. Dana joined him at the window. You're one of the last living witnesses, Sergeant Cole. If we're going to expose the truth, it has to be now. In 5-10 years, everyone who served at Crimson River will be gone, and the truth dies with them. Aiden thought about Tyler Shaw, who'd been 20 years old when he fell screaming into the river. About Hunter Briggs, who'd held the line with a shattered arm and never fired a rifle again after the war. About Connor Blake, who'd drunk himself to death trying to forget. What do you need from me? He asked. The Montana Historical Society's archives in Helena were housed in a building that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and the particular mustiness that comes from storing decades of documents. Dana had called ahead, pulling strings with colleagues who owed her favors. By the time she and Aiden arrived the next morning, several boxes of military records were already waiting in a private research room. Aiden had spent a sleepless night in a motel outside Crimson River, his mind churning through possibilities and memories. He'd called his daughter Morgan for the first time in 3 months. She'd been surprised to hear from him, more surprised when he told her what he was doing. "Dad, are you sure this is healthy?" she'd asked. He'd told her he didn't know, but he had to try. She'd promised to come visit when this was over. It was something. Now, surrounded by filing boxes and Dana's methodical system of colored tabs and sticky notes, Aiden felt simultaneously purposeful and overwhelmed. The research room was small, with 1 window overlooking the street, 2 tables, and uncomfortable metal chairs. "Coffee?" Dana asked, though she was already pouring from a fresh thermos. Apparently, she operated primarily on caffeine and determination. "Thanks." Aiden accepted the cup and surveyed the boxes. "Where do we start?" "I've divided the records into 3 categories: personnel files, engineering reports, and incident investigations." She pulled out the first box. "I've already reviewed most of these, but I need your eyes. You were there. You might catch something I missed because I don't have that contextual experience." They worked in silence for the first hour. Aiden found himself looking at photocopies of documents he'd filed himself: supply requisitions, patrol reports, duty rosters. Seeing his own handwriting from 34 years ago was disorienting, like reading letters from a stranger who happened to have his name. "Dana," he said, holding up a document. "This is my report from April 12th, the one where I reported the stress fractures to Captain Reed." She came to look over his shoulder. "What about it?" "It's been edited. Look here, this paragraph about the inspection marks on the bolts. In my original report, I detailed specifically which bolts showed tampering and their locations. Someone's redacted that entire section." Dana's eyes widened. She pulled out her laptop and opened a scanned file. "This is the version I received through FOIA. You're right. There's a gap in the document numbering. Someone removed content. Who has the authority to redact a sergeant's field report? In wartime? Anyone with sufficient security clearance, but typically it would need approval from either intelligence or command." She made notes. "This supports the sabotage theory. If there was nothing to hide, why redact specific technical details?" Aiden continued reading. The next document was Captain Logan Reed's response to his report. It was brief, almost dismissive. "Inspected reported stress fractures, within acceptable parameters. No action required." Reed either didn't take it seriously, or he was covering for someone, Aiden muttered. "Or he genuinely didn't know what he was looking at," Dana suggested. "Not everyone in command had engineering expertise. They relied on specialists, like Ethan Ward," Aiden finished. Dana pulled out another box, this one marked Engineering Corps, Personnel. She rifled through files until she found Ward's folder. It was thick, full of performance reviews, project assignments, and commendations. She spread the documents across the table. "Look at his assignment history. He was brought to Crimson River specifically for the bridge project. Before that, he'd worked on 3 other major construction projects in the Pacific Theater." Aiden scanned the documents. "And after each project, there were incidents. Not as catastrophic as Crimson River, but problems. Structural failures, supply chain disruptions." He looked up at Dana. "You think he was sabotaging those projects too?" "Or investigating sabotage. Remember, he was counterintelligence. Maybe he was tracking someone." Dana pulled out a map and pinned it to the wall. She marked the locations of Ward's various assignments. "Look at the pattern. Every project he worked on was strategically critical, and every failure set back Allied operations by weeks or months. So either Ward was the saboteur, or he was hunting a saboteur who was always one step ahead of him." "Right. And at Crimson River, it came to a head." Dana added notes to the map. According to the timeline, Ward arrived at the bridge in February 1951. Construction was 90% complete. He immediately began conducting inspections and filing reports about potential security vulnerabilities. Aiden found another document, a memo from Colonel Graves to the regional commander. The language was careful, bureaucratic, but the concern was clear. "Lieutenant Ward has expressed serious reservations about personnel reliability regarding the Crimson River project. Request approval for enhanced security measures and background reviews of key personnel." Graves was taking him seriously, Aiden observed. "Yes, but look at the response." Dana showed him the reply from the regional commander, dated March 15, 1951. "Request denied. Current operational tempo does not permit diversion of resources for speculative security concerns. Advise Lieutenant Ward to maintain vigilance through standard protocols." They ignored the warning. Not ignored, deprioritized. There's a difference. The military was stretched thin in 1951. The Korean War was escalating, resources were scarce, and every commander was juggling a dozen crises simultaneously. A vague security concern probably seemed less urgent than keeping supply lines open. Aiden understood that logic, had even used it himself when making decisions in the field. But understanding didn't ease the bitter taste in his mouth. 247 men died because someone decided a security threat was speculative. They worked through lunch, subsisting on vending machine sandwiches and more coffee. The afternoon brought them to the incident investigation files, thick folders full of statements, photographs, and technical analyses. The photographs hit Aiden hard. He'd seen the aftermath with his own eyes, but seeing it captured in black and white, official and documented, made it feel both more real and more distant. The twisted bridge, bodies being recovered from the river, soldiers searching through wreckage. One photograph made him stop completely. It showed a close-up of a broken bolt with a ruler placed beside it for scale. The head of the bolt was sheared off, but the shaft showed clear signs of tampering, file marks, discoloration from chemical treatment. "This is one of the bolts I found," Aiden said, his voice hoarse. "I gave it to Colonel Graves." Dana examined the photo. "There's an evidence tag. It was logged and analyzed." She flipped through the technical analysis report. The engineering team concluded that the bolt failed due to metal fatigue consistent with prolonged stress exposure. "That's bullshit. Look at the file marks. That's deliberate sabotage." "I know, but officially, it was metal fatigue." Dana pulled out another document. "However, there's a dissenting opinion buried in the appendix. A structural engineer named Ryan Pierce filed a separate analysis. He concluded that at least 15 critical bolts showed signs of pre-weakening consistent with deliberate tampering." "Why isn't that in the main report?" "Because it's marked as minority opinion, not supported by command review. Pierce's analysis was noted but not acted upon." Dana looked frustrated. "It's all here, the evidence, the testimony, the concerns. But at every step, someone made a decision to minimize it, classify it, or bury it." Aiden felt a cold anger settling in his gut. "Who made those decisions?" Dana pulled out one final document, a routing slip showing the approval chain for the final incident report. It went through multiple hands: the engineering team, the incident investigation board, legal review, and finally, for approval and release, Colonel Mason Graves. "Graves signed off on the official version," Aiden said. "The one that blamed structural failure and enemy action while burying evidence of sabotage." "Yes, but look at this." Dana showed him a handwritten note clipped to the routing slip. The handwriting was cramped and hurried. "Report approved for release as written. Dissenting analyses to be classified and held pending further investigation. MG." "Pending further investigation? Did that ever happen?" Dana shook her head. "Not that I can find. Graves was reassigned to the Pentagon in June 1951. Ryan Pierce died in a training accident in 1952. And Ethan Ward—" She trailed off, pulling out a final folder. "Ward's service record ends in September 1952. No discharge paperwork, no forwarding address, no pension records. He just vanishes." Aiden stared at the folder. People don't just vanish from the military. They do if they enter witness protection, or if they're eliminated as a security risk. Dana's voice was quiet. "I've been trying to track Ward for 6 months. Every lead goes cold. It's like someone erased him." The room suddenly felt too small, too warm despite the autumn chill outside. Aiden stood and walked to the window, watching pedestrians go about their ordinary lives. Somewhere out there, if he was still alive, Ethan Ward was living under a different name, carrying the truth about Crimson River. "We need to find him," Aiden said. "I know, but I've exhausted every conventional avenue. Military records, Social Security, property records, nothing." Aiden turned back to her. What about unconventional avenues? Dana raised an eyebrow. Such as? You said Ward was counterintelligence. That means he had contacts, networks, people who would have worked with him. Aiden's mind was racing now, connecting dots. And I know someone who might be able to help, someone who worked military intelligence during the same period. Who? Her name is Alex Mercer. She's in her 80s now, lives in a veterans home in Virginia. We served together in a different theater, but she moved to intelligence after the war. If anyone would know how to track someone who went dark, it's her. Dana was already pulling out her phone. Can you contact her? I can try. We haven't spoken in years, but... Aiden paused. If she's willing to help, she'll need to know everything. And that means trusting her with information that got men killed. Do you trust her? Aiden thought about Alex Mercer, sharp, fearless, and one of the few people who'd never treated him like damaged goods after the war. Yeah, he said finally. I trust her. Alex Mercer's voice over the phone was exactly as Aiden remembered. Crisp, direct, with a hint of warmth underneath the military efficiency. After 30 years, hearing her say his name made something in his chest tighten. Aiden Cole, I'll be damned. I heard you died. Almost did a few times. Surprised you're still around too, Mercer. Too mean to die. He could hear the smile in her voice. What can I do for you? And don't tell me this is a social call. You only reach out when you need something. Fair enough. Aiden glanced at Dana, who was listening intently on speakerphone. I need help tracking someone who went dark in 1952, probably intelligence-related, and I need to know what really happened at Crimson River. There was a long silence. When Alex spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Why are you digging into that particular mess? Because I was there when the bridge fell. Because 247 men died, and I've spent 3 decades being told it was just bad luck and enemy action. But it wasn't, was it? Another pause. You're on a recorded line, Aiden. Be careful what you say. Dana spoke up. Ms. Mercer, my name is Dana Steele. I'm a historian researching the Crimson River incident. This conversation is being recorded for research purposes only, with consent from all parties. We're not looking to cause trouble. We're looking for truth. Truth is a luxury the military doesn't often indulge in, Ms. Steele. But Alex's tone had shifted slightly, less guarded. All right, I'll tell you what I can, which isn't much. But this doesn't leave your research, understand? Some stones should stay unturned. We understand, Aiden said. We're looking for Ethan Ward. He was counterintelligence at Crimson River. Do you know him? I knew of him. We never worked together directly, but we moved in the same circles. Ward was good, smart, thorough, and he had a reputation for being incorruptible. That's a dangerous quality in intelligence work. What do you mean? I mean he couldn't be bought, threatened, or convinced to look the other way. If Ward thought something was wrong, he pursued it regardless of whose career it might damage. Made him effective, but unpopular. Alex paused. What specifically do you want to know about him? Dana leaned toward the phone. We know he was investigating possible sabotage at the bridge before it collapsed. We know he filed reports identifying security threats. And we know he disappeared from all records in 1952. We need to find him, or at least find out what happened to him. Ward didn't disappear by accident, Mrs. Steele. He was disappeared. There's a difference. Aiden felt his stomach drop. Are you saying he was killed? I'm saying he was removed from the situation in a way that made sure he couldn't talk, whether that meant witness protection, reassignment under deep cover, or something more permanent. Alex trailed off. I don't know, but I can tell you that in 1952, several intelligence officers who'd been involved with sensitive investigations suddenly found themselves reassigned to extremely remote positions or retired early. Ward was one of them. Do you know who ordered it? Nothing official. But the scuttlebutt was that it came from high up, Pentagon level, maybe higher. Someone wanted Crimson River closed and sealed. Alex's voice hardened, and before you ask, I don't know who the saboteur was. That information was compartmentalized above my clearance level. Dana exchanged a glance with Aiden. But you have suspicions. Suspicions won't help you. What I can tell you is that the sabotage at Crimson River wasn't an isolated incident. There were other events, other accidents that fit the same pattern. Someone was systematically undermining Allied operations, and they were good enough that they stayed hidden for years. A mole, Aiden said flatly. A highly placed one with access to planning, logistics, and personnel. The kind of access that would let you know exactly which projects to target for maximum impact with minimum exposure. Alex paused. Ward was close to identifying them. That's why the bridge fell when it did. It wasn't just about destroying a supply route. It was about eliminating Ward's investigation and anyone who might have been helping him. The implication hung in the air like smoke. 247 men killed to cover up treason. Dana's hands were shaking slightly as she made notes. If Ward was that close, he must have documented his findings. Where would those records be? If they still exist? Either buried in classified archives that won't be declassified in our lifetimes, or destroyed to prevent exactly what you're trying to do. Alex sighed. I wish I could give you better news, but the truth about Crimson River was buried deliberately and thoroughly. Even if you find proof, who's going to care enough to act on it? The war's been over for decades. The people responsible are probably dead. The survivors care, Aiden said quietly. The families care. History deserves to know the truth. Maybe, but be careful, Aiden. People who dig too deep into classified military operations have a habit of encountering obstacles, career-ending obstacles, sometimes worse. Dana spoke up. Miss Mercer, is there anything else you can tell us? Any lead, no matter how small? There was a long silence. Aiden could almost see Alex weighing her options, decades of military discipline warring with whatever conscience she'd maintained. There's one person who might know more, Alex finally said. Captain Logan Reed. He was the engineering officer at Crimson River, right? Yes, Aiden confirmed. But he signed off on reports saying the bridge was structurally sound, because he was told to. Reed wasn't dirty, he was incompetent, or more accurately, he was out of his depth and being manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to handle him. Alex's voice took on a storytelling quality, like she was piecing together old memories. After the bridge fell, Reed had a breakdown, complete mental collapse. He was hospitalized, medically retired, and as far as I know, he spent the rest of his life in and out of psychiatric care. Where is he now? If he's still alive? No idea, but I remember hearing he'd settled somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Oregon, maybe. He was trying to rebuild his life away from anything military. Dana was already typing on her laptop. Logan Reed, engineering officer, medical retirement 1951. She pulled up search results. Here, Logan Reed, age 91, currently residing at the Cascade Veterans Care Facility in Eugene, Oregon. Aiden felt a surge of something between hope and dread. He's alive. Alive. But according to this, he has advanced dementia. He might not be able to help you. Dana looked up from her screen. Still, it's our best lead. Then we go to Oregon, Aiden said. Alex, thank you. I know this wasn't easy. Just be careful, both of you. And Aiden, if you do find the truth, think carefully about what you're going to do with it. Some revelations cause more harm than good. After they hung up, Aiden and Dana sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, the October light turning golden and then amber. Oregon's a long drive, Dana finally said. We could fly. Could. But I'm thinking we take the scenic route. Give me time to prepare questions for Reed. Make sure we have all our documentation organized. She started packing up the research materials. Besides, I want to stop at a few archives along the way. There are military records facilities in Idaho and Washington that might have information we've missed. Aiden nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. Logan Reed, the man who'd dismissed his concerns about the bridge, who'd signed reports saying everything was fine when it wasn't. A man who'd carried that guilt for over 3 decades until his mind broke under the weight of it. "Do you think he knew?" Aiden asked. "About the sabotage?" Dana carefully placed documents back into their folders. "I think he suspected something was wrong but didn't have the courage or the knowledge to act on it. And that destroyed him more effectively than any court-martial could have. He was a coward. He was human. Not everyone has your strength, Aiden." Dana met his eyes. "You spent 34 years living with this, and you're still standing. Reed lasted less than a year before he crumbled. That doesn't make him evil, it makes him weak, and weakness can be just as dangerous as malice." Aiden thought about the young captain he'd known briefly. Logan Reed had been 32 in 1951, an engineer promoted too quickly in a war that burned through officers like fuel. He'd been nervous, uncertain, relying heavily on his specialists for technical decisions. Exactly the kind of person a skilled manipulator could control. If Ethan Ward was right, if there was a highly placed mole, Reed would have been the perfect tool, Aiden said. Give him information that seemed authoritative, play on his insecurities, make him feel like he was in over his head but couldn't admit it without looking incompetent. And when he finally realized what he'd been part of, it broke him. Dana closed the last file box. "The question is whether there's anything left of him that can help us. Dementia is unpredictable. Some patients have remarkable clarity about distant memories even when they can't remember what they had for breakfast." "When can we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I need to arrange leave from the foundation, and you should probably call your daughter again. Let her know you'll be gone for a while." Aiden pulled out his phone, looking at Morgan's contact information. His relationship with his daughter had always been strained. Too many missed birthdays, too much drinking, too many nights when the nightmares made him someone she didn't recognize. But lately, since he'd gotten sober 2 years ago, things had been slowly improving. "I'll call her tonight," he said. The Cascade Veterans Care Facility sat nestled in the foothills outside Eugene, Oregon, surrounded by pine trees and autumn colors that would have been beautiful if Aiden's stomach wasn't churning with anticipation and dread. The drive from Montana had taken 3 days, with stops at military archives in Boise and Seattle that had yielded frustratingly little new information. Now, on a gray October morning with rain threatening, they were finally here. The facility was nicer than Aiden had expected, modern, clean, with large windows and accessible grounds. A far cry from the depressing warehouses where some veterans ended their days. Someone had cared enough to make sure Logan Reed landed somewhere decent. "Nervous?" Dana asked as they walked from the parking lot. "Terrified," Aiden admitted. "What if he can't remember?" Or worse, what if he can, and it destroys what's left of him? Then we'll deal with it humanely. We're not here to torture an old man, Aiden. We're here for truth, but not at any cost." The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 40s named Brooke, checked their visitor passes and made a quick call. "Mr. Reed is in the common room. He's having a good day, actually, fairly alert, but please keep your visit short. He tires easily." She led them through hallways decorated with artwork created by residents, past a dining hall where lunch was being prepared, to a bright common room with large windows overlooking a garden. Several residents sat in comfortable chairs, some watching television, others reading or working on puzzles. Logan Reed sat by the window, a blanket across his lap despite the room's warmth. At 91, he was small and frail, his skin like paper, his hands shaking with a slight tremor. But his eyes, when they turned toward Aiden and Dana, were startlingly clear and intelligent. "Captain Reed?" Aiden approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "My name is Aiden Cole. I was a sergeant at Crimson River. This is Dana Steele, a historian. We'd like to talk with you, if you're feeling up to it." Reed's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then, slowly, recognition dawned. Cole, Sergeant Cole, you reported the fractures, the bolt tampering. His voice was thin but steady. I didn't listen. Aiden pulled up a chair, sitting so he was at eye level with Reed. Dana remained standing, her recording device ready but not yet activated. Sir, we're trying to understand what really happened at the bridge. We know there was sabotage. We know you were caught in the middle of something bigger than any of us understood at the time. Reed's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. I was a fool. Worse than a fool, I was complicit. 247 men died because I was too proud to admit I didn't know what I was doing. Tell us what happened, Dana said gently. Please, it's important. Reed looked out the window at the garden, where leaves were falling in the wind. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of someone who'd rehearsed this confession in his mind for decades. I was assigned to Crimson River in January 1951. It was supposed to be the highlight of my career, overseeing the completion and maintenance of a major strategic bridge. But I was an engineer, not a soldier. I understood stress calculations and load-bearing capacity, but I didn't understand war. I didn't understand treachery. He paused, his breath wheezing slightly. Brooke appeared with water, which he sipped gratefully before continuing. Ethan Ward arrived in February. Lieutenant Ward. He was counterintelligence, but he told me he'd been brought in to consult on security protocols. He was brilliant, knew more about structural engineering than I did, more about military operations, more about everything. I was intimidated by him and grateful for his help at the same time. What did Ward tell you about the bridge? Aiden asked. At first, nothing concerning. He conducted inspections, reviewed our maintenance schedules, asked detailed questions about our personnel. But in March, he started flagging concerns. Small things. A bolt that seemed looser than it should be, stress fractures that appeared overnight, supply deliveries that didn't match our orders. Dana leaned forward. Did he tell you he suspected sabotage? Not directly. Ward was careful, always presenting things as potential irregularities requiring investigation. But I understood what he was implying. Reed's face twisted with old pain, and I ignored it. Because acknowledging it meant admitting that something was catastrophically wrong on my watch. It meant calling in higher authorities, subjecting my work to scrutiny, possibly ending my career. So you filed reports saying everything was fine, Aiden said, trying to keep accusation out of his voice. Yes, and Ward knew I was lying. He filed his own reports going around me to Colonel Graves. That's when things got complicated. Reed's hands were shaking more now, his breath coming faster. I was called into a meeting with Graves and another man, civilian clothes, no identification. They told me that Ward's investigation was compromising operational security, that I needed to provide official assurances that the bridge was structurally sound to prevent panic and maintain morale. They told you to cover it up, Dana said flatly. They told me the investigation was ongoing through proper intelligence channels, and that my job was to ensure the bridge remained operational while that investigation proceeded. They made it sound reasonable, necessary, and I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that someone else was handling the problem, so I didn't have to. Aiden felt a complex mix of anger and pity. Reed had been weak, yes, but he'd also been manipulated by people who knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. Who was the civilian? Aiden asked. Reed shook his head. I never knew his name, but he had authority. Graves deferred to him completely, and he knew details about the bridge construction that he shouldn't have known. Specifications, personnel assignments, supply chain information. He spoke like someone who'd been involved from the beginning. Dana and Aiden exchanged glances. A civilian with deep knowledge of the project, with authority over a colonel, with the ability to orchestrate a cover-up. This was the mole Alex had mentioned. Highly placed, with access to everything. What happened after that meeting? Dana asked. I did what I was told. I filed positive reports, dismissed concerns, and tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing. But Ward wouldn't let it go. He kept investigating, kept filing reports, kept pushing. And then, Reed's voice broke. Then you came to me, Sergeant Cole, with evidence of tampering, physical proof that someone was sabotaging the bridge. And I looked you in the eye and told you it was nothing. Metal fatigue, acceptable parameters. Why? Aiden's voice was rough with emotion. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what admitting the truth would mean. Afraid of what would happen if I'd been wrong to trust Graves and that civilian. Afraid of losing everything I'd worked for. Tears were running down Reed's face now. And because of my fear, 247 men died screaming. The room was silent except for Reed's labored breathing and the soft sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Brooke hovered nearby, concerned, but Dana gestured that they needed a few more minutes. Captain Reed, Dana said gently, do you know who the saboteur was? Reed wiped his face with a shaking hand. I have suspicions. After the bridge fell, after my breakdown, I spent years trying to piece it together. The civilian who met with Graves. I saw him once more weeks later at the Pentagon. He was in a general's uniform. I couldn't get close enough to see his name, but I remembered his face. Do you remember what he looked like? Tall, maybe 6'2", dark hair going gray, scar on his left hand between the thumb and forefinger, and his eyes, cold, analytical, like he was always calculating, always 3 steps ahead. Reed looked at Aiden. Ward figured it out. The day before the bridge fell, he came to me one last time. He told me he knew who the saboteur was, that he had proof, and that he was filing a final report that evening. He begged me to shut down bridge traffic until his report could be reviewed. What did you do? I told him I couldn't authorize that without direct orders from Graves. Ward left, and that was the last time I saw him alive. Reed's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The next day, the bridge fell. Ward survived, but his report disappeared. And when I tried to find him afterwards to tell him I was sorry, to tell him he'd been right, he was gone. Vanished like he'd never existed. Aiden stood and walked to the window, his mind racing. Ward had identified the saboteur and filed a report. That report had disappeared, and Ward had been disappeared shortly after. The mole had covered their tracks completely, sacrificing hundreds of lives to maintain their cover. Reed, this is crucial, Dana said, her voice urgent. Think carefully. In all your time at Crimson River, did Ward ever give you any indication of who he suspected? Any name, rank, or detail? Reed closed his eyes, concentrating. The room was silent, except for the rain and his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. He said something strange the last time I saw him. He said, "The iron that holds the bridge is corrupted, but the steel in command is worse." I didn't understand it at the time. I thought he was being metaphorical, talking about the sabotaged bolts and the command structure that wasn't taking the threat seriously. But, Aiden prompted, but what if he was being literal? Iron and steel. The bridge was iron construction. But steel... Reed opened his eyes, suddenly focused. There was a General Steele at the Pentagon. He'd overseen the strategic planning for the bridge project. And he had a distinctive scar on his left hand. I saw it in a photograph in Stars and Stripes magazine. Dana had gone pale. General Steele. First name? Marcus, I think. Marcus Steele. He was decorated, well-respected, considered a brilliant strategic mind. Reed looked at her. Why? Do you know something? Dana sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Marcus Steele died in 1968. Car accident officially. But there were rumors at the time that he'd been under investigation for corruption and possibly espionage. The investigation died with him, and his service record was sealed. Aiden felt the pieces falling into place. A general would have the access Alex mentioned. He'd know which projects to target, when to target them, how to cover his tracks, and he'd have the authority to make people like Ward disappear when they got too close. He'd also be perfectly positioned to feed intelligence to enemy forces, Dana added. Strategic information, supply routes, troop movements. The bridge wasn't just about sabotage, it was about giving the enemy a tactical advantage. Reed was nodding slowly. After I was hospitalized, after they forced me into retirement, I tried to tell people what I knew. But no one would listen. I was the officer who'd declared the bridge sound, who'd missed the sabotage. Anything I said was dismissed as a mentally ill man trying to shift blame. So you stopped trying, Aiden said, understanding completely. I stopped trying. I spent decades medicating myself into numbness, trying to forget. But you never really forget, do you, Sergeant? The screams, the faces, the knowledge that you could have prevented it. Aiden returned to his chair, sitting heavily. No, you never forget. They sat together in silence, two old soldiers bound by guilt and the weight of impossible choices. Outside, the rain fell steadily, washing the autumn leaves from the trees. Finally, Dana spoke. Captain Reed, would you be willing to make an official statement? On record, documenting everything you've told us? Reed looked at her for a long moment, then at Aiden. Will it help? Will it change anything? It'll give closure to the families, Aiden said. It'll set the historical record straight. And it'll honor the memory of the men who died by telling the truth about why they died. Then yes, I'll make a statement. It's 34 years too late, but... Reed's voice cracked. It's all I have left to give them. Dana set up her recording device while Brooke brought fresh water and tissues. For the next hour, Logan Reed told his story in full, the words coming easier now that he'd begun, like lancing a wound that had festered for decades. He detailed meetings, conversations, the pressure he'd felt, the choices he'd made, and the guilt that had consumed him. When it was done, Reed looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if confession had lifted a weight he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. Thank you, Captain, Aiden said, shaking Reed's frail hand, for your courage today. Courage is doing the right thing when it's hard, Sergeant Cole. What I showed today was just honesty, and it came far too late. Reed gripped Aiden's hand with surprising strength. But you carried this burden with honor. You tried to stop it, and when you couldn't, you survived and kept trying to find the truth. That's the real courage. The rain had stopped by the time they left the facility, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of pine. Aiden and Dana sat in the car for a long moment, neither speaking, processing everything they'd learned. We have the truth now, Dana finally said. Reed's testimony, combined with the documentary evidence, builds a strong case that the Crimson River disaster was the result of deliberate sabotage by a highly placed traitor. But we can't prove it was General Steele, Aiden pointed out. Reed's identification is circumstantial. The man's been dead for decades, and Ward's report, the one piece of evidence that might have named him directly, disappeared. True, but we have enough to petition for a formal military review. To get the incident reclassified from structural failure to enemy action and possible sabotage. That would open up the classified files, force a real investigation. Aiden thought about that. A formal review would mean attention, questions, bureaucracy. It would mean reliving everything again, but this time publicly. It would mean the families finally knowing the truth. Let's do it, he said. Let's file the petition. Dana nodded, pulling out her laptop to make notes. As she worked, Aiden's phone buzzed. A text from Morgan. Dad, I've been thinking about what you're doing. I'm proud of you. Come visit when you're done, okay? I want to hear everything. Aiden felt something warm in his chest. Not quite healing, but maybe the beginning of it. He'd spent 34 years being eaten alive by guilt and silence. Now, finally, he was doing something about it. Dana, he said, there's one more thing we need to do. She looked up from her laptop. What's that? We need to go back to Crimson River, to the bridge. I need to tell them, all of them, that we found the truth, that they didn't die for nothing, that people will finally know what really happened. Dana studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, we'll go back, and we'll make sure their story is told. They drove north through Oregon and Washington, then east into Montana as October gave way to November. The landscape changed from coastal green to high desert to mountain valleys, and with each mile, Aiden felt something shifting inside him. Not closure, he didn't think he'd ever truly have that. But purpose, maybe. A sense that after 3 decades of carrying this alone, he was finally sharing the weight. They reached Crimson River on a cold, clear morning. The town was as abandoned as it had been weeks ago, but somehow it felt different now. Less haunted, maybe. Or perhaps Aiden himself had changed. They hiked down to the river, to the ruins of the iron bridge. The morning sun caught the rusted metal, making it almost beautiful in its brokenness. Aiden stood at the water's edge, looking at the twisted wreckage, and spoke aloud the names he'd memorized 34 years ago. Tyler Shaw, Hunter Briggs, Jordan Cross, Connor Blake. One by one, he named them all, 247 men who died because a traitor had valued his own interests over their lives. Dana stood beside him, recording the moment, documenting this final piece of the story. When Aiden finished speaking the last name, he felt tears on his face, the first he'd cried since the bridge fell. "Rest easy," he said to the river, to the bridge, to the ghosts of men long dead. "The truth is coming. I promise you, the truth is coming." They stood together in silence as the river flowed past, eternal and indifferent, carrying water that had witnessed horror and would continue flowing long after everyone involved was dust. Finally, Aiden turned away from the bridge. "Let's go home. We have work to do." As they walked back up the trail, the November sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the valley with golden light. Behind them, the iron bridge at Crimson River stood as it always had, broken, rusted, a monument to sacrifice and betrayal. But now, for the first time in 34 years, it would also be something else, a witness to truth finally told.